I've been doing the video side of this, and part of that's been a live stream, which has been very tangential so far. It's been very sparsely viewed. A couple of people have looked at it and commented it. But we are possibly entering into a place where people do not want to gather together in public spaces. So the link for the live stream has been going out in the announcement. It's a YouTube link. So in future, if people are interested in taking part in the discussion, there's also a live chat that is part of it. So people, and we'll have to make some facilitation arrangements, but people can actually remotely enter in questions, and we can capture them and answer them if it comes to that. And hopefully it doesn't, because it's nice to have you all here. And speaking of having you all here, this is the fifth session. We don't really have someone to do the book excerpt. Is that right, Tony? We don't have someone to do the book excerpt. Oh, Mike's going to do it. That's right. Sorry about that. So Mike Stout, come on down, and you're going to do the excerpt from the book.
I want to thank everybody. Is this on? Can you hear me okay? First thing I want to do is thank everybody for braving it and coming out today and not being afraid of my germs. Thank you very much. Before we get started, I want to recognize that today, March 8th, is International Women's Day. And I come from a tradition back in New York City when thousands and thousands of people were out in the streets celebrating International Women's Day, which was started right here in the United States. And we're just about the only country left on the planet that doesn't celebrate in a mass way International Women's Day. So I'd like to take this time and congratulate and thank all my sisters here for being in the struggle for us. This is the fifth in a series and about trying to put together a platform and a blueprint for the future that we call the Green New Deal. And for me, the Green New Deal, especially as it pertains to the issue of water, is not something that's just some pie in the sky, nice idea, but it's something not only necessary, but something that has to be considered an emergency for those of us that have anything to do with water, for any of us that have anything to do with what's going on in this area as it relates to fracking and the petrochemical industry. Anita, Naomi Klein's first chapter about water, if you read it, is about the Gulf oil spill and what it's done to the ecology, what it's done to the region down there, what it's done to the businesses down there, what it's done to the Gulf, and the fact that what it's done to more than just the Gulf and the ocean, but what it's done to the marshlands and places that it's affected on land too, that are going to be with us for thousands and thousands of years. I would like to say that what they're facing in the Gulf is we're facing our own Gulf oil spill up here. And that Gulf spill is called fracking and called the petrochemical complex that's getting ready to come online in Monaca, Beaver County, and elsewhere in the tri-state region. And I don't say that lightly. I think we have the equivalent of a level 5 tornado and level 5 hurricane coming our way. With the pollution, with the chemicals, and with the destruction of our land, air, water, and our food chain. The first speaker I'd like to introduce is somebody that I've heard on a number of occasions, Dr. Ned Katire. He's a Pittsburgh-based physician. He's with for a long time, he completed his residency at Children's Hospital in Pittsburgh. He's also a clinical assistant professor of pediatrics at the University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine. He's a member of the American Academy of Pediatrics Council. And more importantly than anything to me, he's a member of Physicians for Social Responsibility and also the Southwest Pennsylvania Environmental Health Project, which are two organizations that have been monitoring and tracking the destruction to our environment and natural habitat and water that fracking and the petrochemical industry are having. Ned's going to give you a good overview of just exactly what we're up against. With no further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Ned Katire.
Thank you, Mike. Can everybody hear me? All right, so I'm surprised we're not starting with a song. Maybe next time. Thank you. So we're going to try these slides with PowerPoint. I'm an Apple guy, and we'll see how these go. The title, actually, of this talk is Petrochemical Cluster Frac, Inherent Dangers. And the inherent dangers flash in red. But this doesn't come up that way, so I apologize for that. But I do a lot of work with Environmental Health Project, and over the past few years, I've been really researching what's going on in the gas patch and meeting individuals and families and communities of the gas patch. And it really is remarkably damaging what's going on, especially in Washington County, where I live, which is the most heavily fracked county in Pennsylvania. I probably don't have to remind anybody that we're doing this fracking to not to turn on our lights or to cook our food or to heat our homes. In Southwest Pennsylvania, we're doing this for, plastic. Ethane is fracked up from the ground and is sent to cracker plants like this one being built by Shell in Beaver County. This is still a couple of years away from going online. We're going to talk about the airshed consequences of this particular cracker plant. But the whole purpose of this whole cluster frac is to make these things, these plastic nurdles. Somewhere I read they're going to make almost 2 trillion of these little things every year. In order to do it, this one cracker plant is going to need about 250 additional shale gas wells to come online every year. There are 3 or 4, maybe even 5 other cracker plants that are being considered for the Ohio River Valley. So that's going to be about 1,000 additional unconventional shale gas wells that are going to have to be drilled and fracked every single year in order to make plastic, which is certainly one thing that nature doesn't need any more of. By the middle of the century, so I'm seeing a lot of young faces, when you guys are at the peak of your professional and your personal careers and your personal lives, if we keep on the course that we're going in now, scientists tell us that there will be more plastic in the ocean than fish by 2050. I'm hopeful that I'll be kicking around, maybe in an old folks home, but for you, for my children who are young adults, it's very, very concerning. Before I go on, I want to share with all of you something that I participated in this past week, a very, very important moment in my activism. Last year, a large group of climate advocates from around the world signed a letter, a little over 450 of them, signed a letter calling on the United Nations to endorse a global ban on fracking. One of the leaders of this letter and of getting trying to get a meeting at the UN was Michelle Fetting. I think some of you know her. Michelle is at the Breathe Project here in Pittsburgh. Surprisingly, a month after the letter was sent, the UN came calling and said, yes, we would like a group of you to come to New York to speak with the Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations. And I was lucky enough to be invited to this meeting. There were 8 of us in all. Lois Bjornson, some of you may know Lois. She lives in Washington County. She's deeply affected. Her family and her community are deeply affected by fracking in Washington County. She was also invited to attend. So Michelle and Lois and myself were the Pittsburgh representatives. We had representatives from the EU, from Ireland, from Mexico, and a couple of others from the United States. Sandra Steingraber was also in attendance. Some of you may know her as a prominent biologist and ecologist. So last week we went to New York. And we met with the Assistant Secretary General of the United Nations. That's him, right there. We spoke for about an hour. The meeting was an hour and a half. Each of us gave about a 5-minute presentation on the situation. The 3 of us from the Pittsburgh area spoke about our experience in Southwest Pennsylvania. Lois and I, coming from Washington County, again from the most heavily fracked county in Pennsylvania, had things to talk about the people that we know intimately that have been impacted. I can't tell you what was said at the meeting. That was said off the record, as it were. But I can tell you that we are now on track. We have a roadmap for moving forward to work with the international community to try to get a global ban on fracking. But there is one thing that I will tell you that was very much on the record. And it's what the Assistant Secretary General said when he was going over the math and the science of the climate crisis. He's deeply knowledgeable about that. We are not running out of time, he said. We have no time. And that was truly a chilling moment to hear him say that. He's very, very knowledgeable. He knows what's going on. So back to fracking. People are getting sick when they live around gas wells, compressor stations, pipelines, refineries, the highways where the trucks are going nonstop 24/7. And it's because of the what's coming up from the earth. Certainly, there are other inherent dangers with fracking, but the drill cuttings alone, the solid waste that's created when you drill and you get the rock and you get the dirt, you get the drilling muds, they all come up and they're contaminated. Every black shale formation in the world is radioactive. It turns out that the Marcellus Shale is highly radioactive. It's one of the most radioactive shale formations in the world, or at least that's known, highly radioactive. That's actually been known for decades. The fracking companies have known about it for decades. The oil and gas companies have known about it for decades. But it turns out nobody told any of us about that. So the drill cuttings, which are radioactive, are also contaminated with the fluids that go down, as well as some other things that has to be disposed of. And it's disposed of in landfills, municipal and commercial landfills. As you know, what goes onto a landfill can get blown off a landfill and affect surrounding communities. The landfill produces leachate, which is basically rainwater that seeps through the landfill. It gets collected at the bottom, and that leachate has to be treated before it's discarded. The leachate is typically sent to a water treatment plant, which is completely unable to treat it. Ultimately, that contaminated water goes into our rivers. In the Mon Valley in Washington County, that's the Monongahela River, which provides drinking water for a lot of people. In fact, from the Monongahela all the way down the eastern part of the Ohio River, about 5 million people rely on that water for drinking. The water that comes up is also contaminated. It's contaminated with the fracking chemicals that are used. Tens of thousands of gallons of fracking chemicals are used. Some of them are cancer-causing, some of them are endocrine disruptors, some of them are very irritating to the lungs, to the lining of the intestine. These fracking chemicals exist with a salty brine that comes up. The saltwater brine is from the ancient seabed. It's extremely salty. As you know, salt water is very corrosive to steel and metals. The whole infrastructure of oil and gas and of petrochemicals is steel. So you can imagine the type of plaques that develop, the type of scales that develop, the type of corrosion that happens, and that will happen within the infrastructure. Natural elements like lead and arsenic, natural earth elements, they also come up and can and have been known to cause human health impacts. Naturally occurring radioactive materials, the so-called norms, which normalizes the whole thing, radium-226 and radium-228 especially. And then the gases, the natural gases, the gases that exist naturally in shale formations, the volatile organic compounds. You've heard of benzene, which causes cancer in children and adults. Perhaps you've heard of toluene, which can cause permanent neurologic damage to people who are exposed. Formaldehyde can cause cancer. There are polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, and there are many of them, and these can act as endocrine disruption chemicals in the body. You don't need a whole lot to cause endocrine disruption, especially in a fetus and an infant, and it can cause devastating effects on growing infants and children. Radon gas is a decay product of radium-226, and there is that to contend with. Radon, you may know, is the leading cause of lung cancer in non-smokers. And then you have what we're drilling for, which is the natural gas, the methane, which leaks like crazy from shale gas operations. Methane has to be released, has to be flared, has to be vented. This is not a closed system. From the wellhead all the way to your stovetop or to the electric generator, it's not a closed system. It's open on purpose. It's a typical fossil fuel operation where the atmosphere has to be used as a sewer. So this is no different. Methane, as you know, is 86 times more potent a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide is over a 20-year time span. Over a 100-year time span, it's still 20 times more potent than carbon dioxide. And then, of course, the liquid hydrocarbons. I'm hoping that you have all read Justin Noble's most recent article in Rolling Stone magazine. It was in last month's Rolling Stone. I would encourage everybody to read it. Every paragraph is a bombshell. Every paragraph will make you stop and wonder what the hell is going on. Justin spent a lot of time in Southwest Pennsylvania doing his research, almost 2 years. I had the opportunity to work with him as he gathered the information for his story. He's presented here in Southwest Pennsylvania many times. He's coming back. I believe May 7th in Beaver County, there's going to be an event where he'll be speaking, but he comes back often to speak. He actually spoke at an evening meeting that we had last week in Queens, New York, at the CUNY Law School. It was really, really terrific. He gives a great talk. So We know that fracking is bad. Okay, I think all of us in this room know it, but it's all documented. It's all compiled in the 6th edition of the Fracking Science Compendium that's been produced by Concerned Health Professionals of New York and PSR. Easy to find online. Go to psr.org and download it. It includes more than 1,700 peer-reviewed studies and investigative reports looking into all aspects, all parts of the infrastructure of fracking and the health impacts that we're seeing. These are mostly recent studies since 2013, so it's all recent research. 84% of the original studies show health harms in people related to fracking. What's clear is this quote here at the bottom. There is no evidence that fracking can operate without threatening public health directly or without imperiling climate stability upon which public health depends. You really don't have to say anything more than that. But I will. The evidence is in. Living near fracking sites is dangerous to pregnant women and their fetuses. We now know that women are at a higher risk of having a baby born with low birth weight or prematurely or with a birth defect the closer they live to fracking infrastructure. We know that living near fracking sites increases the risk for asthma, skin rashes, headaches, and cancer, which everyone seems to be worried about. We have a cancer crisis, a childhood cancer crisis in Southwest Pennsylvania. You've probably read The Human Toll by Don Hopi and Dave Templeton. Today, in fact, in the Post-Gazette is another installment of The Human Toll on the front page, looking at a couple living near a compressor station, which has, compressor stations have some of the highest air toxic emissions in the entire infrastructure. What they found is since 2008, in 4 heavily fracked counties in southwestern Pennsylvania, Westmoreland County, Washington County, Greene County, and Fayette counties, a total of 27 cases, since 2008, 27 cases of a very rare bone cancer in children and teenagers called Ewing sarcoma. Ewing sarcoma is an awful cancer. It is absolutely horrible. It's disfiguring, and it's very, very deadly. And it affects children and teenagers whose bones are growing very, very fast. Growing tissues in the body are susceptible to toxic insults, whether it's chemicals, whether it's radiation. And we believe that this is one of them. In addition to the 27 cases of Ewing sarcoma, 40 cases of other rare childhood cancers were diagnosed in this 4-county area in the same 10 years, for a total of 67 rare childhood cancers in a 10-year period. This is unheard of, and the people who live in these communities and have lived here for generations know it. They know that something is different. They've certainly lived with, oil drilling and gas drilling, and they've lived with, conventional gas drilling. They've lived with coal mining. They lived with steel. This is different, and they know it. And what's different is fracking. In Washington County, in one school district, the Cannon-McMillan School District, there were 6 cases of Ewing sarcoma in that 10-year period, and 10 cases of other rare cancers. Bethlehem Center is a little bit further south, just kind of in the southern part of Washington County. 12 cases of rare cancers. These are small rural school districts. The Beth Center School District is surrounded by shale gas activity, wells, pipelines, compressor stations. The same with Fort Cherry School District, which saw 7 cases of rare cancers in their students in just a 10-year period. To give you an idea, I said that 27 cases of Ewing sarcoma in a 10-year period in that 4-county area. the Fort County area has a population of about 750,000 people. Statistically, you would expect about 8 cases of Ewing sarcoma in a 10-year period in an area and a population of 750,000. We're talking about 27 cases. There's something up there. So we went to the governor in November. We got in his face. A bunch of us from Washington County went over to Harrisburg, and we told the governor that we want an investigation. We want him to investigate. We want that investigation to be thorough, and we want it to be transparent, and we want it now. 5 days later, he announced a $3.9 million study on fracking and its health impacts, particularly as it relates to childhood cancer. That was back in November. It's now the middle of March, and they're still putzing around with the study design and who's going to do the study. And so we'll see how this gets done and when it gets done. Once it starts, we've been told it's going to be a 3-year study. By the end of the study, of course, we'll have another governor. I think I think it's pretty clear to me that the governor would rather eat glass than have a study like this. So he'll be gone by the time the results come in. A lot of activity, oil and gas activity in Pennsylvania. Most of it's in the northeast part of the state, southwest part of the state. What's important, though, is to zoom out. And this is really what's going on. This is all about plastic, right? And you can see on both sides of the Ohio River, these yellow dots are the fracked gas wells that are going to supply the ethane to go to the cracker plant. Here are the pipelines. Okay, there's also another pipeline that's going east from Houston, Chartiers, Houston, from the Mark West plant, the refinery. That's the Mariner 2 that's going to take ethane to eastern Pennsylvania, where we're going to ship it abroad. So there's going to be a lot of export of ethane to other countries as well. Compressor stations, more than 40 in Pennsylvania. There are hundreds in the tri-state area. So this is what it looks like from space. The cracker plant is going right where that purple dot is. That's where it's going. You can see the surrounding communities. Zooming out, you can see the airport. And you can see downtown Pittsburgh on the lower right. The distance, 24 miles as the crow flies. And the pollution from the cracker plant is going to follow the path of least resistance, which is down the river valley. So I would expect that a lot of this pollution will end up downtown. I'm going to go through this quickly. This is Environmental Health Project's air model, looking at the effects of that we expect from this cracker plant. We've looked at areas 1 mile, 3 miles, and 5 miles in circumference around the plant. We look at the highest chemical emissions: nitrogen oxides, carbon monoxide, VOCs, PM 2.5, the fine invisible particulate matter, and other hazardous air pollutants. And it's a conservative model. We only assume 50% of the permitted emissions are actually going to be emitted. We know that it's not going to be, it's going to be a lot more than 50%. And weather data, wind speed, wind direction, inversions are going to factor in as well. This is what's been permitted by your DEP. A lot of really bad chemicals, hundreds of tons of nitrogen oxides, which when they combine with VOCs form ground level ozone, which affects all of our lung function. Carbon monoxide, toxic to every human. The VOCs, the PM 2.5, ammonia is very toxic to livers and to brains. And I just want to point out the greenhouse gas equivalents, 2.2 million tons, 2.2 gigatons from one plant every year, which totally blows the city of Pittsburgh's climate action plan out of the water. Health impacts on the left side, you can see that if you're getting a little bit of emissions, you're getting a little bit of symptoms. You're getting a lot of emissions, you're getting a lot more symptoms. And so you can see also that the further away you are, the less emissions you're exposed to, so the less symptoms you're expected to have. But I want to point out 1 mile east of the cracker plant is the Beaver Valley Mall. It has shops, restaurants, has a Head Start program, a senior center. AHN just built a new cancer center. And you can see down on the bottom, just extreme emissions. The patients that go there, the staff that go there, the shoppers, the restaurant goers, the little kids, the seniors, they're going to have a hard time. 2 miles away, Community County of Beaver College, same thing. Community College of Beaver County. 3 miles away, the Heritage Valley Health System. There is a river system in the United States that we should be using as a comparison. The lower Mississippi River Valley between Baton Rouge and New Orleans, which is full of cracker plants, refineries, plastics factories. That's the name that you all know, Cancer Alley. So I just want to finish up. I want to thank Mike for having me. What does this have to do with the Green New Deal? I don't know. I think you're going to figure that out. But Southwest Pennsylvania knows all about resource extraction and the resource curse. We know all about it. We were mining coal 260 years ago. First oil well 160 years. We've been fracking for 15 years. We know all about it. We know about the steel industry. We have lost jobs here. We've lost industries, whole industries before. We've lost steel making. We've lost coal mining. We've lost an airline. Remember, we had an airline that was here, thousands of people employed. They're gone. But this I know. Jobs are replaceable. Lives are not. Thank you.
I think what we're going to do is hold the questions and answers and discussion after our next speaker. I think you're going to find our next speaker dovetails with what Ned just laid out perfectly. Ken Dufala was one of the founding members of the Greene County Harry Enstrom chapter of the Isaac Walton League. For those of you who don't know, I'm the president of the Allegheny County chapter of the Isaac Walton League. Our mission is to preserve and protect the air, water, wildlife, natural resources, and food chain. And when I say protect it, I mean defend it. And Ken is the reason why that I started. In fact, I was a member of the Isaac Walton League chapter down in Greene County, as were Walton D. and about 7 other people, and they encouraged us to get a chapter started up here in Pittsburgh. And the reason being is that we know how important it is, critical, to bridge this urban-rural divide that we're facing, and that the system and that the capitalist class is doing everything they can, the fossil fuel companies, to put a divide between the people that live in the rural areas and work in the rural areas and the people that work and live in the urban areas. Ken is a biologist. He's an avid fisherman. He's been doing what he's been doing for a long time down in Greene County. And the way he got, shall I say, radicalized was the Isaac Walton League stocked streams down in Greene County every year with fish. And one year, I believe it was 2009, 2011, I can't remember which year, but Two of the streams they stocked, 95% of the fish died immediately. So they started testing the water. When they found out what was in the water, they sent it to the DEP. Then they found out what the DEP was all about, and that the DEP is nothing but a graveyard to bury the truth. So they went out and got independent testers from Duke University, John Stoltz from Duquesne, people from Penn State, and began to do serious testing on the water. The other thing that they did is they formed a coalition, not just with our chapter, but with Center for Coalfield Justice and with Southwest Pennsylvania for Environmental Health Project. And what we did, and Ken spearheaded along with Dallas Slagle, who's also here from the Harry Enstrom chapter, is they went back 15 years and collected all the evidence from every water authority between West Virginia and Allegheny County, and lo and behold, found that there was more than 25 cancer-causing chemicals that are routinely being dumped into our water, into our streams, flowing into the Mon River, and becoming our drinking water. 12 or 13 of these chemicals are not even regulated by anybody. 13 of the main ones are regulated, but they're routinely exceeded, and their standards are all completely different depending on what their source is, whether it's the DEP, the EPA, or the EWG, which is the Environmental Working Group. We're getting ready to release the study and to wage a public campaign, and here to describe what he found in the study and also how we're going to carry this campaign out, I'd like to introduce Ken Dufala from Greene County. Give him a hand. Talk into the microphone again.
Oh, I think you can hear me without the microphone.
No, we're recording.
Okay,
So,
thank you kindly.
yes.
Okay. The fish kill, I have to correct Mike on that. We tested the water, it was no good. We didn't stock the fish. We weren't going to waste them. We have had fish kills before the Fish Commission is stocked, but we tested the water. We don't put anything in unless we test the water. I want to introduce this gentleman here. His name is Dallas Slagle. He's the president of the Isaac Walton League of Harry Enstrom chapter. He's one of the most brilliant people I've ever had the pleasure of working with. He joined the league because I went and drafted him. I said, I need you, come with me. And Dallas has been very, very instrumental in this paper. Mike gives me 20 minutes to discuss this paper. 10 years here. In 2010, we realized that the drilling industry was coming on big time. So we developed what was known as the Citizens Water Monitoring System. It's an early warning system to say if there's something wrong in water. We worked with Waynesburg University, one of their students, Miranda Thornton, who found things. We went to the DEP. They confirmed what was there, radiation, thorium. If you're not familiar with thorium, it has a half-life of 5 billion years. So it's going to be around a while. Radium-226, I believe, Doc, is what, 1,600 years on the half-life. You mentioned Beth Center High School. I graduated from Beth Center High School. I live in the house that I was born in. It's been in my family 100 years. My family were coal miners, steel mill workers. I grew up, and I knew there was a problem. I've been fishing in Greene County and Washington County for 70 years. I know the water. I am an aquatic biologist with a background in organic chemistry. So I know a little bit. I'm not going to say I'm an expert. I won't do that. I'm not here to tell you whether fracking is good or bad. I'm here to give you factual data. This is fact from EWG, WRI, DEP. The DEP will no longer come out and investigate any of my written complaints, nor will they accept any of my phone calls. Governor Wolf, shake 'em up. You want a paper done, $3-point-some million? I'll give it to you. It won't cost you $3 million. It's here, it's factual, you can take it to the bank. So let's get into this program here. We're going to start with drinking water standards. Our drinking water standards are woefully inept, woefully. We need this paper because, and the reason we did this, because we knew that there was stuff going through our drinking water that was not being tested for that could be very harmful to children and the rest of the populace. I'm a former teacher and a former park ranger. I have been in service for the community for years. Also a Deputy Waterways Conservation Officer for 21 years. The Environment Rights Amendment, Article 1, Section 27 of the Constitution of the Commonwealth, it's in here, we'll be putting it up, will guarantee every citizen pure water. That's your right. But it's not being followed. I did a talk for 17 representatives and read the definition of pure to them. Okay. Worker and community rights. There is no such thing as proprietary chemicals. Act 159, through Mike's people and the unions, guarantees you the right to know what's in the water and the air around where you are working. So when they throw out proprietary, as the old teacher said, poppycock. Okay, it's not. You have the right to know what chemicals are being used, yet time after time after time after time, they tell you proprietary. They've told you they would release these proprietary chemicals. It's never been done, because I'm going to show you why in a little bit, why it hasn't been done. The EWG, WRI, and the DEP is where we get this. None of this information is testing that comes from us. We have just put a data bank together of what's out there by the authorities and the agencies responsible. We're going to give you some of the chemicals reported, and we're going to give you the health effect of some of these chemicals. Why was this paper done? To establish and mandate safe drinking water standards for chemicals and toxins insufficiently addressed by the current state regulations. Most of them are not addressed at all, let alone insufficiently. The Environmental Rights Amendment, here you have it, guys. Here you have it. That's your constitutional right. That's yours. And I have to pay this whole big game about politics and this and that. There it is in writing. It's your right. Follow it. As you notice, I get a little buoyant because I'm very upset about this. Very upset. The law that I referred to that Mike worked on in his group, Worker Community Right to Know Act, Act 159, there it is. There it is. It's the law. Why aren't we following it? Talk about frustration. We make laws and then we don't follow them. We don't need more laws. Let's just follow the ones we got. They're good. They're good. Federal government legal limits are not health protective. The EPA has not set up new tap water standards in almost 20 years, and some standards are more than 40 years old. What has happened in our area in the last 40 years? I can tell you what's happened since 2010 because I've got data on it. And the reason we put that data out there is because one of the things that the industry says, how do you know it wasn't there before we started? Well, I know now. I got the data. Environmental working group that I give a lot of praise for. The Environmental Working Group's mission is to empower people to live healthier lives in a healthier environment with breakthrough research and educations. We drive consumer choice and civic action. They are a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization dedicated to protecting human health and the environment. Notice I said nonpartisan. Nonpartisan. Up here we have the mission of the West Virginia Research Institute. We also have the mission of the DEP. I want you to look very carefully at the DEP's mission. Look very carefully, read it. And while you're reading it, ask the question, why won't the DEP work with us and come out and do more testing? It's their mission. It's their statement, not mine. I didn't make this up. Well, the next guy you see there, what is in the water? What are the standards and where is it coming from? Well, we know pretty much what's in the water now, and we're going to show you here very shortly. Now, we've been testing water. We've probably tested close to 150 streams and sampling sites. Some of the water is so good you can reach down, get a cup, and drink it. Back in some of the rural areas of Greene County. And some water is so bad you don't want to touch it unless you have gloves on. So there's quite a variety. But remember this, everything that we put in the water from Greene County comes to Pittsburgh. You know what flows downhill. I don't have to tell you that. It all comes downhill. So what we decided to do is to take and go a little bit further into this, and we went, and Dallas did this, is we went and turned around and started in Morgantown, West Virginia, and came all the way down to Clairton and started looking for what's in the water. Now, we went to EWG, Environmental Working Group, because the water authorities have to test this water and send these samples in. They have put this all together, and this is what we found. And then they made recommendations. You're going to see recommendations from the EU, European Union, on fracking, on different materials, different industry things. They are now changing it. The EU is in the process of changing their standards because they realize they're not stringent enough. There are chemicals, and we'll be getting to that very shortly here. And I'm going to have to maybe move you a little bit, Dallas, so I can see those. If we look at some of these contaminants that we have here, we have bromochloromethane. I'm not going to do a lot of them. I'm just going to do a few. Bromochloromethane. Notice the federal limit. Notice what EWG recommends. Notice what the World Health Organization. That ppb is parts per billion. If you want to know what a part per billion is, if you take a grain of salt and whack it with a hammer and get them little fine pieces, that's a part per billion. So that's how small this stuff is that's causing our problems. Notice bromoform. The key word I want you to look at is bromo. Look at your standards. Chloroform. Look at your standards. Chlorite, which is we know is chlor. Chromium hexavalent. Why did that do that? We all know. Scared me. We all know about Aaron Brockovich and hexavallium 6 chromium. We are all familiar with that. Here's another one, dibromochloromethane, dichloroacetic nitrate, radium-226 and 228. That's an interesting little factor there. But I want you to look under the federal limits. What does it say? None, 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 none. Look at all the nones. Don't you think there ought to be something that says this much, this much, this much? Our state of Pennsylvania has a right to set standards. If there is no standard from the federal government for bromochloromethane, the state of Pennsylvania has a right to set that limit. Are they doing it? No. When I question them, you know what they tell me? There's no federal standard, so we follow the federal standard. That does not help the people living here. I'm sorry. That's, again, poppycock. Okay? So we go down through these, and you can look at all the different things that we have down.
The next one down below, underneath, there you go.
This one?
Next one down,
This one?
just tap it.
It's too complicated for me. I'm from Greene County.
You're good.
I'm good?
Yep.
Okay. Now, these chemicals that have none, let's take a look at this. Let's see what health effects they have. Okay? Take a look at this one right here. Cancer, reproductive harm, fetal development. That's what, Doc, you were talking about. Treatment, byproducts, and water. If your raw water coming into your treatment plants is contaminated, our treatment plants for drinking water are so inadequate and outdated, they are not addressing this. They're not even testing for many of this stuff. It's going right through into your drinking water. Your children, your grandchildren, pregnant moms, you're drinking this stuff. It's coming straight through. There's no standard for it. They could dump 50,000 gallons of this stuff in your water treatment plant, and you can't do a thing about it because there's no standard for it. Wait a minute, there's something wrong here, big time with that. Look at chloroform. At least let our kids have a chance. Chloroform, chloride. Do you know that the thyroid problems in this area has increased almost by 4 times in the last 10 years? Wonder why. It tells you what is here and what it causes. I'm telling you, Governor Wolf, you don't need this study. Here it is. There it is. It's fact. Next one.
Next one below. No, next one below. Tap it and send.
Get over here. Oh, don't you just hate us, Smarty? Total trihalomethanes, 80 parts per billion. We do have a standard for that. Now let me clue you on something about trihalomethanes. It is any halogen. It could be chlorine, it could be bromine, it could be fluorine, it could be acetine, right down the line. Any halogen can produce trihalomethanes, any one. If it's bromo, then it has bromide in it. If it's dibromo, it has 2. And tri has 3, and so forth and so forth. 80 parts per million, Werthaugen says 100. That's a recommendation of EWG. Have we gone over this limit? Yes. Have we gone over this limit in the Best Center School District? Yes. I graduated from that school district. I had one person with cancer. We had 269 graduates just in the senior class with one cancer. Now we got 12 cases you reported here? Ridiculous. All of this stuff, barium, notice here, chlorate, none. We're back to that none again. Fluoride, diethyl. I have a minor in organic chemistry, and I look at this stuff and I just shake my head. How's a common person supposed to know what that is? There's no way. No way. But what you do know is if it causes cancer or other things. The DEP, this is amazing, and they don't like me. They know me, but they don't like me very much. But that's okay. I've been disliked before. They take trihalomethane in 4 quarters, and they test it every quarter, every 3 months. You're allowed 80. You could have 85 for 1 quarter. You could have 89 for 1 quarter. You could have 100 for another quarter, and you could have 55 when the water's high and it's diluted. They average them all up and say, it's safe. Yet 3/4 of the time, you could be drinking water that's unsafe with trihalomethanes. Their methodology is terrible. Was mentioned compression stations. Do you know they do each compression station individually? They look at the compression station and say, you got this much volatile chemicals coming off. They go to the next one, you say this much. Is it me, or should they add these all up and find out what the cumulative effect is instead of doing each one individually? Am I just a dummy from Greene County that can't figure this out? Come on now. Let's get with the program, will you?
Tap that one underneath it, right in the center. No, the one underneath it, right in the center. There you go.
Hey, I'm getting better. There's what it causes. Now, a little interesting story about that. You guys have probably heard about chloramine being added to your water. Well, chloramine does slow down the production of this. The only thing it does is it eats the lining out of your pipes and exposes lead. So, well, we don't have trielement. No, I'm going to give you lead instead. You know, that's what's going on with this kind of stuff. We're just woefully, we are so far behind where we should be in treating our water and our air. Just take a look. Take a look. Take a look. I'm not going to go down through all of those. But you just take a look. See where they come from. Am I saying that fracking is causing this? I'm not saying that. I'm going to leave that up to you. I'm telling you, we didn't notice this stuff 15 years ago. Now we got it. What's changed? I'll leave it up to you. I'm not here to tell you whether you're pro or anti. That's not me. I'm here for clean water. I'm here for clean air. And by God, I'm here for the health and safety of our children. That's why I'm here. Because in a couple of years, I'm going to be dead. And I know that. I'm 73. I'm not going to be around much longer. But I am not going to quit fighting for our children until the day they throw dirt on me. There's some more. You can see, look at this. There's that big none. Dump it all in the rivers. Get rid of it. It's our sewer system. Dump it in there. It's out of our hands. We don't have to. Do you know that we are the only active industrial country that does not make the industry test to see if the chemicals that they're introducing into our environment are safe? We do it this way. Put them in, and then let's find out if they're safe. And if they're not safe, then you fight and make us take it out. That is stupidity at its highest. It's stupidity at its highest. If you don't put that crap in the water in the first place, you don't have to take it out. That's common sense. The idea of solution to pollution is dilution is antiquated. Prevention is a cure for preservation. Don't put it in there and let's preserve ourselves. There we go again.
No, up, right there.
Here we go again, guys. You see where it's coming from. I mean, this is not a study that we just conducted in 5 minutes. I've been working on this for a year. What'd you put up? How many minutes, Mike?
You got 3 minutes left.
We're doing good.
I got 10 years in this, Mike. Okay.
Next one up, right there.
We're right here.
No, next one down, right there.
This will give you some idea, compared to the EWG, how many times higher some of the water authorities, this is Southwest, the reason I chose this, because this is the one I got. I don't drink her water, I drink spring water. But take a look at 227 times higher, 117 times higher than recommended by EWG, the Environmental Working. I'm not talking 10 times or 5 times. Look at those numbers. Here's some more. Pittsburgh American, ever you get Pittsburgh America water? If you do, there it is. I think I told you before, I got a surprise for you. Here it is. You like this one? 369 times higher than what it should be, according to EWG. Not me. I'm not the authority on this. This is just their data. Well, summary. We have the Act. Article 1, Section 27 of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. The Workers and Community Right to Know Act 159 gives the citizens of Pennsylvania certain rights pertaining to clean water. These rights are being neglected and overlooked. The state lawmakers and regulatory agencies are no longer protecting our people. The data clearly shows that our drinking water standards are woefully inept. The current practice of solution to pollution is dilution is antiquated and must be changed to prevention is the cure for preservation. This gentleman right here, we're going to post this paper online. And Do we go to here?
Next one down.
Here we are. This paper will be posted online that you're more than welcome to read. If you have any questions, please contact us. We are here. We don't get paid for this. I don't get paid by industry from being here. I don't get paid for anybody for being here. But like I said, the kids are our most valuable resource. The most valuable resource that this country has to offer. We are poisoning them. No good, guys. Let's raise these standards. Let's all get together. Forget Democrat, Republican, Independent. Forget that bull. Let's say we all need clean water for everybody. Everybody drinks water. Everybody breathes air. And I'm sure, and I have great respect for what you're doing, Doc, that you see this on a regular, and it makes your heart cry. Every time I see a child, I get a tear in my eye because I don't know what their future is going to be. Please, let the buck stop here, and let's make it better for them than we are now. It's up to us. Dallas, you have anything to say?
Thank you, Ken. Thank you, Ken. Thank you, Ned. We'll like take about 15 minutes now here. People have questions or anything, comments on for Ned and for Ken and Dallas. Good, Jer.
We're gonna pass the mic around, and also I'm gonna take stack, because if you have a question, just raise like your name tag or name.
My name is Johnny. It's fine. You guys, for everyone there, does UPMC have any knowledge of any of this, any involvement in any of this, other than making a amount of money off of people being sick? I just wanted to know if you guys know if anybody.
I think you just answered your own question.
Okay.
For Ned, Ned, I've been to your presentation with Lois, and I've seen your presentation here. Is there any place where where we can get this information ourselves to try and pass this information along to other people that we're connecting with? For instance, when we're going to Harrisburg, how can we get I'd like to have some of these facts to actually present to them. Is there any way we can do that?
I can give anybody my card, and I can send you a copy of the slides. The one thing, though, is that I won't share the air model. And the reason is that I presented it very quickly, but there is a lot more detail to that air model that if you don't know the details, that's something that could trip you up if somebody had different motives, and it would just be a difficult situation for you. So, but I'm happy to share my slides with anybody. The compendium is online. Environmental Health Project has an excellent website that has a lot of this information that I talk about in handouts that you can copy, you can distribute, and you can use. Between the compendium and Environmental Health Project, Frac Tracker Alliance, their website is fabulous. Don't make anything up when I present. All that information is there as well. I'm happy to share my slides.
Anybody else? Maren?
A very quick question on the air model while you're here to address it. As a person who I garden a lot and I hang my wash outside, I pay attention to the weather and I look at animated radar maps, seeing where the precipitation is moving and sometimes the cloud cover. Is there, and by and large, we have prevailing southwesterlies, so I would think that we should be even more concerned about crackers coming in further down the Ohio to our southwest. But what is it that, you're saying that the pollution will come up the river valley. Is there a subtlety that I'm not collecting that I can perhaps grill my meteorologist spouse about?
Yeah, I guess I would
Who spoke
ask.
here in the second session.
I am not a meteorologist, but basically we know. I mean, you know from the Clairton Coke plant, for example, that air pollution. Again, it's west to east. Maybe it's northwest to southeast. Maybe it's southwest to northeast. But it's generally west to east. But that smell comes into the east end of Pittsburgh. That also follows the river valley.
But it's also
Right.
coming from the south.
Right.
It may be that the pollution is hanging down in the river valley because it's heavy.
Right.
But, I mean, coming from Clairton is a little more plausible because it's coming from the south.
So we get winds from the northwest.
Occasionally.
I don't know enough about the meteorology. Yeah, I don't know about enough about it. But when I see it in the winter and the fall, it tends to be westerly to north and northwest down. In the spring and summer, it tends to be more from the south, coming up from the south.
It may be that it's a different layer. I just wondered
Yeah.
if you knew
No,
the scoop there. Okay.
no,
thanks.
yeah.
Lake effect snow, where's it come from? What direction is that?
We haven't been getting it all the way down.
Oh, yes, we get it, lake effect snow comes to Greene County, so I know you're getting it here too, before the lakes freeze over. It's north to south, north on an angle.
But Marin's right. You get air current flows coming up from the Gulf on top of currents coming down from the Arctic. And depending on which current is on top and which is underneath is going to depend on which is the heaviest and which is bringing the most pollution in.
It has to do with pressure and temperature, but we can move on to other.
Yep.
I just want everybody here to know, in case you didn't know, Greene County has the highest cancer rate of all 67 counties in Pennsylvania. Second is Washington County. The advent of the chemicals and the cancer rates coincide exactly with the advent of fracking in western Pennsylvania, and there is no question about it. And I just want to emphasize what Ken and Dallas presented is understand that what they went back is they dug out from every single water authority from West Virginia up to Allegheny County and went back 10, 15 years and pulled their records. This is not something that environmentalists tested. We didn't, it wasn't them testing. This is what the water authorities themselves are routinely reporting. They're routinely reporting that dozens of cancer, endocrine disrupting chemicals, birth defect causing chemicals are routinely being put in our water. And the one thing that they didn't mention too, another place that it's coming from besides those sources is we have 9 landfills in western Pennsylvania, including one called Tervita landfill, which straddles Westmoreland, Washington, and Allegheny County. Underneath those landfills are pools, and those pools is where the chemicals leachate and go into the streams and become our drinking water. We busted them. It took us 4 years on the Tervita landfill. They were busted. They were forced to put a moratorium on for 4 months, taking fracking waste into it. So then what did the DEP and what did the government do? And the Water Authority in Bell Vernon, they fined them $24,000 for all the poisons they've been putting in for the last 15 years. $24,000. Mel?
You can probably hear me. This is actually reference. What? Oh, it doesn't get recorded then? Yeah, right. Yeah, you want the mic? I'll bring the mic. I'll bring the mic. You want me to have it? I'll use it. I don't care.
I just had a quick question. I had a quick question for Dr. Ned. We were involved the day that Wolf was approached, and he quickly put the fire out by promising this study. And now it's been how many months where it's kind of been on the back burner. Are there any of the, I know Sarah Anamorado is involved, Summerlee. Are there any other of the legislators that are joining in here? Can we talk or put the pressure on, or let them know we're still waiting for some kind of action here, or keep reminding the governor of his promise and kicking this thing off?
Well, I think that there are lots of people that need to be reminded. There are lots of people who you can, send an email to, you can pick up the phone and call. Certainly Sarah Innamorato and Summer Lee are champions of public health. We're lucky to have them. There are a few others in Pennsylvania who have come out to take a tour, and they've been equally appalled at what they see when they tour Washington County. Senator Dalen Leach is about to propose a constitutional ban on fracking in the state of Pennsylvania. He has a bill that he has written up. He's just waiting. He's been waiting for my understanding, waiting for the Attorney General to decide whether he's going to announce any cases against these companies before he does that. So, but certainly he's an ally in this. He understands. He used to be a supporter of the industry. I think Connor Lamb, I think his position is abhorrent. It really is. He could use a visit to his office in Mount Lebanon, or and just, he's a nice guy. I've met him. I have a lot of respect for him, but he just misses the point. And so many people, and you see it with the election coming up, so many people who say, climate action is important, it's urgent. Yes, renewables are good. Yes, we need a clean economy. And yet they support fracking. They support petrochemicals. You can't have it both ways. House Bill 1100 is also something the governor needs to be encouraged to veto that bill. And the other members of the House and Senate need to not override it, not override that veto. They need to hear from everybody about that. That's a horrible bill.
Along those lines, we were active in. Anybody can call the governor's office, and they will just take your discontent for the 1100 and say to veto it to him. They don't even ask your ID. They just mark it down and say, we'll give that to the governor. Your
Thank
opinion.
you, Walt. Mel? Oh, I'm sorry.
Somebody else has back ahead of me, I think.
Yeah, that's me now, so I'm giving it to you.
He's giving it to you. Oh, Johnny, I want to respond to what you asked before. The Allegheny County Health Department is the body that's supposed to monitor and work for the health of all Allegheny County residents. It's been headed up until recently by a woman named Karen Hacker, who just left and went to the CDC. She knew nothing about air quality. She was dragged kicking and screaming into the fight around Clairton. She's been replaced now in May, I think it is, by a woman named Deborah Bogan, who is a pediatrician from Children's Hospital. She has a very, very good reputation when it comes to opioid crisis and pregnancy. There's no indication that she knows anything about air quality. There's also no indication that she won't be interested in it, except to do that means to fight the very person that appointed her, which is Rich Fitzgerald, who is the Allegheny County executive and who is a firm proponent of fracking. So it remains to be seen whether or not we could do something to put pressure on her to actually oppose those powers. Right now, I don't think we know where she is on it, but we're hoping that we'll get something out of her. UPNC itself, by the way, has never shown any interest as a body in taking on the issue of air pollution, and particularly when it comes to fracking. They're just not interested in doing that at all, because that would also mean fighting some of the political powers who then might challenge their nonprofit status.
I'd just like to say the second part of the forum here is going to be a presentation by Heather from One Pennsylvania and myself on what to do about it. How do we get from where we are to where people like Ken Dufala and Dr. Ned talked about. So with that, I would like to take a 10-minute break. Everybody get up, stretch, get something to eat, and then we'll resume to what I think is a very important part of this conversation, is how do we get to where we need to get to. Thank you. With that, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, who's somebody that's has her heart not only in the environmental movement, but also the labor movement. She works with One Pennsylvania and their water monitoring program, and they're a statewide organization that's doing incredibly good work. I'd like to introduce you to Heather McLean.
All right. Hello. Yeah. There we go. Get that shotgun stance. All right. So hello. I am Heather McLean. I am an environmental justice organizer for One Pennsylvania. And One PA is a member-led statewide organization that builds power in communities, especially communities of color, to fight for changes that we need. We fight for clean air and water, as well as a just transition away from oil and gas industries. Our members attend municipal water agency board meetings, and we speak out for environmental justice concerns locally, as well as in Harrisburg. I think as far as the Blue-Green Alliance, for it to work, we need political will and industry leadership that's accountable to the people. Unfortunately, that has tended to come from public pressure and regulation enforcement. Some recent history with the PWSA lead crisis and the Our Water campaign are a good example of how industries can start to get it right and what we can learn about what it takes. So I'm part of the Our Water campaign, which is a coalition of environmental, labor, and community organizations that represent tens of thousands of ratepayers in Allegheny County. We include representatives from groups like Pittsburgh United, Clean Water Action, Pennsylvania Interfaith Impact Network, Sierra Club, New Voices for Reproductive Justice, the Hill District Consensus Group, 9 Mile Run Watershed, Women for a Healthy Environment, Thomas Merton Center, just to name a few, as well as community leaders who are directly impacted by the mismanagement of our water systems. And surprisingly, in Pittsburgh, that whole coalition works really well together. The Our Water campaign slogan is safe, affordable, publicly controlled water for all. And I just want to talk a little bit about the history of that language and why it's important here. Safety of our water became a prevalent issue when high lead levels were recorded throughout Pittsburgh Water and Sewer Authority system in 2016, right on the heels of the lead crisis in Flint, Michigan. Lead is a highly toxic pollutant that can damage neurological, cardiovascular, immunological, developmental, and other major body systems. Even though we have an arbitrary federal action level of 15 parts per billion, we know that at any level, lead is especially harmful to children and pregnant women. In 2016 and 17, when we were seeing levels up to 60 and 80 parts per billion, the private international water company Veolia was managing Pittsburgh's system and had cut corners on the erosion control chemicals that are used to treat the water, allowing an increased level of lead to enter the system from our aging pipes. Veolia had also set up new faulty metering systems that drastically raised rates for customers, hitting on the affordability aspect of our slogan. So we were paying an arm and a leg to drink poison water. In order to get it all under control, we needed public control. Eventually, PWSA felt the pressure of the DEP for changing their erosion control system without notice. The DEP and public outcry. County Controller Chelsea Wagner demanded that city officials take on oversight of the situation. City council members demanded lead-safe water filters for residents. The health department required free lead testing for kids in the affected households. Meanwhile, lead lines that were up to 100 years old needed to be replaced, and state law stated that property owners are responsible for replacing the private side, so PWSA did partial lead line replacements in order to comply. But with the partial line replacements in effect, we continued to see high lead levels. It was eventually discovered that doing partial line replacements were making the situation worse, and it was necessary to replace the full line all at once. Many property owners couldn't come up with the money to replace their side in enough time. Funding for this came from a settlement with Veolia, and PWSA found state funding as well to cover full replacements for low-income households. That money has since expanded so that full lead line replacements can be done across the board. This scenario gives us some insight on the high cost of privatization. Private corporations cut corners and lack transparency. When the shit hits the fan, like in the case of the Deepwater Horizon disaster or Veolia's mismanagement of Pittsburgh water, the cleanup and accountability become difficult to navigate. At the beginning of this year, PWSA announced that the lead levels in the system are below the federal action level of 15 parts per billion, and new state funds will make it possible for more customers to get full lead line replacements and afford their water bills. As far as I know, we are one of the first cities to make full lead line replacements possible. PWSA has experienced a turnaround, but only after getting rid of Veolia, remaining publicly controlled, and listening to public groups. Other cities are starting to look at PWSA for how to manage their aging infrastructure with the least amount of financial strain on themselves and their customers, and without privatizing. The Our Water campaign continues to work with PWSA, encouraging them to do better, as well as share their successes so that other agencies don't have to be forced to do the right thing under the same time and financial constraints. We hold all of the area agencies accountable by attending monthly board meetings and making sure that the leadership on those boards are in tune with our focus of equity, safety, and sustainable green infrastructure solutions in the face of the climate crisis. Members of our campaign sit on the Low Income Affordability Advisory Committee, also known as LIAC, which has come up with a number of affordability programs like bill discounts, a winter moratorium on shutoffs, and the full line replacement program. We're now trying to get a similar advisory committee set up for Wilkinsburg Penn Joint Water Authority, which also has been experiencing high lead levels. PWSA seems to be willing to work with us and work with other authorities like Wilkinsburg Penn Joint to address the steps needed to improve their management before being forced to do so. Unfortunately, this can be a struggle with the smaller municipalities themselves, like Wilkinsburg, who are cash-strapped and have not yet been mandated to make the same sustainable changes to their operations. Through conversations between PWSA representatives, the Wilkinsburg Penn Joint Director, and now Ed Gainey's office, we're starting to see Wilkinsburg Penn Joint wake up to sustainable and equitable approaches. With that in mind, this Wednesday, Ed Gainey's office, as well as Jay Costa, will be holding a forum on water to let the public ask questions of PWSA and Wilkinsburg Penn Joint about water safety and affordability, and talk about how these different pieces can be applicable to other outer municipalities. And that will be this Wednesday, March 11th at 5:30 at the Hosanna House in Wilkinsburg. I'll be on one of the panels. Thank you very much. Did you want to take questions, or are you going to keep going, keep it moving?
I want everybody here, as I said before, I'm with the Isaac Walton League, and I just want to give people a little bit of perspective and a little bit of history of why I'm here, why I'm doing what I'm doing, and why I formed a chapter of the Isaac Walton League. For those of you who don't know, I've been around an activist in this area for 42 years. For 10 years, I was the grievance chair for the United Steelworkers Union Local 1397 at Homestead. And back in the 1970s, when the air was really, really filthy, the water was really, really filthy, the color of the water of the Mon bordered usually between black and dark brown. Sometimes you had a puke green. But what we had different back then that we don't yet have now is we had local unions in this valley for the Steelworkers Union that knew that our interests were the same interests as those in the community. So back in 1973, our local union joined with environmentalists around two campaigns. One, the company came out and said that they were going to basically shut the Mon Valley mills down and put in a mill up at Conneaut, by Lake Conneaut. And what we did is we filed a federal lawsuit, and we took to the streets and demonstrated and made the public aware of what it was going to do to the valley and what it was going to do to the working class in this area. It was less than a year the company backed off. We had such a visible, militant campaign. Secondly, we then, our local, joined the EPA and joined Allegheny County, which was then run by 3 commissioners, and we sued, the workers and the community, and the government sued U.S. Steel for the air quality and the water quality in this area. We sued them in 1979, and when we sued them, we didn't just sue them and wait for the courts and sit around and piddle our thumbs. We were down demonstrating every single week down at the U.S. Steel building, making the public aware of what we were doing and why we were doing it. We were educating the public. So what did the company do? The company, headed by David Roderick at the time, who took over the realm at U.S. Steel in 1977, backed off and he signed a consent decree. He signed a consent decree with the EPA, a consent decree with the Allegheny County Commissioners, and a consent decree with our local union. And I still have a written copy with Roderick's signature of the consent decree he signed. And in the consent decree, he said, we're going to clean up this valley. He says, we're going to put in new equipment. We're going to modernize the Homestead Mill. We're going to put a continuous caster in, a basic oxygen furnace, and we're going to put a wastewater treatment facility in on the Mon River right behind Homestead. In fact, if you go to the mall, go to Homestead Mall. If anybody has never been to the Homestead Mall, and you go down the main drag, there's this gantry crane that runs atop. That gantry crane went to a wastewater treatment facility that U.S. Steel actually spent millions of dollars building under this consent decree. September 13th, 1981, they finished construction of the water treatment facility. They announced the layoff of 1,800 workers at Homestead, another 5,000 throughout the Mon Valley. And then they came back and told me, they said, don't worry, the plant's still going to be here, Mike, because look behind you, you got a wastewater treatment facility. He said, that's proof right there, U.S. Steel is going to abide by their commitment, their written word. What did they do a month and a half later? On November 24th, 1981, they spent $6.4 billion and bought Marathon Oil and shut the Mon Valley down over the next 4 years and never put that wastewater treatment facility into operation. They reneged on their written word. They reneged on every promise they made to the steelworkers and the communities of the Mon Valley. And in my opinion, leopards don't change their spots. They're going to do the same thing. The only difference today is they've somehow convinced some in the union leadership that their interests coincide with the company's interests, not with the community's interests. And I think what we need in this area, and I've raised this at a number of different, of these forums we've had, I've been to believe every single one of them, is we've heard speaker after speaker, not just speakers like Ken and like Ned, but like Patty DeMarco and many others get up and eloquently lay out what our goals should be, what kind of economy we should be moving toward, what kind of renewable, sustainable energy we need to be moving toward. And I think what's been missing in all these conversations is how do we get there? Because we're dealing with corporations and we're dealing with banks that are ruthless, they're profit hungry. They're as profit hungry as any junkie you ever met out on the street. And believe me, I've met a lot of junkies in my days. I lived in New York City for 8 years down in the Village, and I ain't met a junkie that was as addicted as these companies and these banks are to the profit and rate of profit they're making off of the misery of the people of this area. And they're going to keep doing it until we build. You talk about, people here talk about political will. Well, you need a movement to build political will. Not only do you need a movement, but you need to understand, and I want to say here that Isaac Walton League, our chapter of the Isaac Walton League, we stand shoulder to shoulder, toe to toe, nose to nose, arm to arm, and eye to eye with Extinction Rebellion, with the Sunrise Movement, and with the Fridays for Future. This is an emergency that can't wait for 2030 or 2040 or 2050. We need a movement in the streets. We need a movement in the political arena. We need a movement in the courts. And we need a movement in the community that makes them aware of what is going on. Our chapter of the Isaac Walton League, when we started, as Ken, we started out with 8 of us a year ago, and we now have 65 dues-paying members. And we decided when we built our chapter that we weren't going to go preach to the environmental movement, that we were going to go out into the communities and into places where they don't know anything about what's going on. And believe me, the public knows nothing. When you go to a church or you go to a community and we do a presentation to a garden party or to a community group and you bring up the cracker plant, they think you're talking about saltine crackers. People don't have a clue what's going on up at that petrochemical industry. They don't have a clue of what the consequences are for our air and for our water and our food supply. You have to get the truth out to people and make them aware of what's going on. That's number one. Number two, we've got a situation in Allegheny County where the enemy, and I say who the enemy is the fossil fuel industry, and the enemy is the financial institutions that are benefiting and profiting and backing the fossil fuel industry. And the other part of the enemy are their political enablers, and I hope know who they are. King Fracker himself is Rich Fitzgerald. If you don't take those people on, and you don't take them on in the streets, and you don't take them on in the political arena, and you don't take them on in the community, and you don't take them on in the judicial arena, and coordinate those efforts, then we're never going to have a prayer of winning. We have got to get the elements of our movement, and when I say the elements of our movement, I mean the community itself. I mean the unions. I mean the churches. I mean the political people who are our allies, like Summer Lee and Sarah Anamorado and the 3 Isaac Walton League chapter members that are sitting on county council. And we need to coordinate an inside-outside political strategy so that when we do what Ken Dufala suggested we do, we have people inside fighting for us. And they know that they have an army outside that's going to go to bat and show up at county council meetings and back them up. There's a number of us in the room, and the only one I can see that I can remember, and I don't want to slight anybody, was Marin, Mel Packer, and myself. 10 years ago, Allegheny County and Rich Fitzgerald announced that they were going to start fracking in the parks in Allegheny County. When he announced that, we had no allies, none, on county council. Within a short period of time, we had one ally, Barbara Danko Daly, who has since passed away from cancer. We had one ally. We went to county council every single month for a year and a half with anywhere from 50 to 100 speakers. Every single month. We deluged them with so much information and so much truth and so much facts. We would give it to them for the 5th time and they thought they were getting it the first time. By the time we finished after a year and a half and they took the vote was 8-5. All the women on council and the African American voted with us to ban fracking in the parks, and the 8 old white guys voted with Rich Fitzgerald. Even though 3 of those old white guys had told me privately they knew we were right. They knew that what we were saying was correct, that what was going to happen was wrong. And yet, when the vote came up, they cowered. And they're going to continue to cower until we start going and showing up at county council meetings and letting them people know that our supporters on county council have an army behind them. And they're going to keep doing what they're doing in Harrisburg. And I agree with Walt, phone calls help, emails help, but I'll tell you what we need to do. We need to start going and taking busloads of people to Harrisburg, and we need to go sit in Governor Wolf's office and stay there until he addresses the needs that we're talking about here. And I'm going to be very specific. I'm going to back up what Ken said. And this is where the Green New Deal comes in and where this should be part and parcel of our local platform and our contribution to a Green New Deal in this area. Number one, we need water testing standards raised. The majority of chemicals that are being put into our water have not been put in until the last 15 years because of the fracking industry. Not only that, but we're on uncharted territory here. There has never in the history of the United States been the combination of chemicals that we have. Because they call it proprietary, because when you approach Cabot or you approach EQT, their answer is, well, we don't know what chemicals we're using because they're a secret. They're a trade secret, and we buy them already mixed from other companies. So you have to go to them. They're in Oklahoma. They're here. They're over there. We don't care where they are. We have the right to know what those chemicals are, and Ken pointed it out. I was part of a labor movement in 1984 that got the community right to know law passed. The Steelworkers Union and the AFL-CIO got that law passed. We as citizens have a right to know not only what chemicals are being put into our water and our air, but where they come from. And that's where that law comes in. It's a very simple process. You petition, and I have copies. I can give anybody in this room and anybody you know a copy of the petition. You petition OSHA, the Department of Labor and Industry, with a form saying, I want to know what chemicals Shell is using in their production process. When they write you back and say, we don't have to tell you, we sue them. Not only do we sue them, but then we get a movement in the streets and let the people know that their own government does not want to tell them what they're breathing and what they're drinking. Number two, make the polluters pay. Back in 1970, when the environmental movement started, that was one of the biggest demands that we won was the Superfund. And the Superfund, if you don't know what that was about, we had three things historically you need to know about the environmental movement that happened right after each, like literally within 1 year. There was a giant oil spill, Standard Oil did. There was a massive fire on the Cuyahoga River in Cleveland, and there was the Love Canal in New York. All three of those events happened within a year. It propelled an environmental movement that forced a Republican, backstabbing, criminal president to pass the EPA, to pass OSHA, to pass the Clean Air Act, to pass the Clean Water Act, and the Clean Drinking Water Act. And it was massive amounts of people in the streets that forced them to do it. And you know who led that movement? I want to enlighten everybody in here. It was organized labor. Organized labor organized the first Earth Day, and the UAW, which stood the most to lose, the United Auto Workers, stood the most to lose because of the type of cars they were producing at the time, which, as we all know, back in the 70s were gas guzzlers. The UAW put up $4.7 million and staff in over 150 cities and organized the first Earth Day. That's how far backwards we've gone to today. We need that coalition back. We need the environmental movement to sit down with the labor movement. We need the environmental movement and the African American communities who are on the front lines to sit down. And we need all of us to sit down with the young people and find common ground and get out into the streets and do whatever it's going to take, because this is an emergency. This is not something that can just be piddled and done piecemeal and done, wait for some congressman or magically wait for a bunch of Congress people to get elected somewhere in the distant future. I've seen too many bills die a slow, painful, silent death in Congress over my last 50 years of activism. There was a bill back in the 70s called the Humphrey Hawkins bill. Probably never heard of it. The Humphrey Hawkins bill was a bill to get full employment, give everybody a living wage job. It sat in Congress for over 10 years and died a silent death. You know why? Not because there wasn't unions lobbying for it in D.C. or some politicians who said they were for it. There was nobody in the streets fighting for it. And there's going to be nothing in this city and nothing in this county happens until we get people out into the streets and demand and tell these politicians and tell these companies and tell these financial institutions no more business as usual. We want our water testing standards raised. And then here's where the Green New Deal comes in. Our wastewater treatment facilities, most of them are 100 years old. Even if we identified what these chemicals were, even if we identified where they were coming from, They are not equipped to filter them out. Our wastewater treatment facilities need a complete revamp, a complete upgrade. Everybody here knows about our sewage water problems, I hope. I was telling Heather on the phone yesterday, I did a Google search. It's really interesting. Do a Google search and just put in Pittsburgh, Allegheny County water main breaks. I went back to May 17th last year. There was 35 water main breaks in Allegheny County. Just in Allegheny County, 35 water main breaks. I can imagine down in Greene and Washington and Fayette, there's dozens more. We have enough work repairing and upgrading our infrastructure. We could put 5 times as many union workers to work as we have now. And I want to tell you one other fact, and I learned this from a painters union, local 57 staff person. You hear some union officials get up and defend workers going up and defending the petrochemical jobs that they have. Well, check this out, folks. This is the first time in the history of Allegheny County in the last 50 years where the vast majority of construction jobs being done in Allegheny County are being done non-union, because the union workers are all pulled away up at the petrochemical plant. 95% of the fracking jobs in western Pennsylvania are being done non-union. 95%. We need to sit down with the rank and file in these unions and not sit back and call them names, not sit back and chide them. We need to sit down face to face with them and find where we have common ground. We need to sit down with the frontline communities. We need to sit down with our young people, and we need to form a real movement, and we need a militant movement. People get all scared when I say the word militant. Well, does anybody in here disagree we're facing a very militant situation? I mean, we are facing the end of life as we know it. And I want to say one thing in closing. Ken talked about the cancer rates down in Greene County and Washington County. Does anybody in here doubt that the cancer rates are just as bad up here in Allegheny County? There is not one member of the Isaac Walton League chapter in Allegheny County, not one, that doesn't have a member of our family, or more than one member, who has died or is dying of cancer. My daughter-in-law, who is 36-year-old, has stage 4 cancer, 2 kids. My niece, who is 39 years old, has stage 4 ovarian cancer. I have another niece who just lost her husband, 40 years old, to cancer. Dee and Walt over there have a cousin who died of Ewing sarcoma. All of us, everybody in the Isaac Walton League, are not just impelled by morals. We have people in our families that are suffering from this outrageous situation that we're up against. And it's time for the people in this room, it's time for the people that are organizing Earth Day, it's time for the people that are organizing around Summer Lee's Unite political campaign, for all of us to sit down together and start kicking a little ass. Thank you. Like to open it up for comments and questions, please.
Come to mind. We have whole countries that are now declaring it illegal to frack in their country. We have we have whole sections of country, like the Lombardy section of what is that, France? Or excuse me, is it Lombardy? It closed down because of the coronavirus, and people don't know whether or not how to think about this coronavirus, because so much has been like when I was doing farm work in West Virginia, when there was a hog carried virus that the pharmaceuticals made a huge amount of money off of selling the antibiotics for it, and it turned out that years later I found out that it was, for the most part, I'm not denying that we have an incredibly difficult situation in the world. We have the four horsemen. We have famine, we have war, and we have disease, and they all work together to make each other worse. But we also have, I want to read, if you will, from Heather Klein's book, Naomi Klein. Climate change acts as an accelerant to many of our social ills: inequality, wars, racism, sexual violence. But it can also be an accelerant for the opposite, for the forces working for economic and social justice and against militarism. Indeed, the climate crisis, by presenting our species with an existential threat and putting us on a firm and unyielding science-based deadline, might just be the catalyst we need to knit together a great many powerful movements bound together by a belief in the inherent worth and value of all people, and united by a rejection of the sacrifice zone mentality, whether it applies to people or to places. Thank you.
Yeah, my question's for Heather. Heather, back in 2018, June of 2018, the Pennsylvania School Code Act 39, Section 42 on lead testing was amended. I'm wondering if you're aware of what this entails. It encourages schools to conduct lead in drinking water testing on an annual basis, and it was supposed to start in the 2018 to 2019 school year. Of course, our lovely legislature and state decided that it's not to be mandatory, but the code required schools that do not test to discuss lead issues in a public meeting setting implement a remedial plan if it results exceed 15 parts per billion, and any elevated lead levels must be reported to the Pennsylvania Department of Education. Are you aware of any school districts in the area that have participated at all or have made this aware in public session as required?
Yes, I mean, in Pittsburgh there have been some schools that have had elevated lead levels, and they have put in the those drinking water stations. Is one of the things I've seen, like at King Elementary School. I've seen them there. There are a couple of groups, including Get the Lead Out, and I believe maybe Lead Safe Allegheny, as well as some statewide groups that are starting to focus on mandating schools more appropriately, because we've been seeing a problem in the Philadelphia area with lead levels as well. So, yes. And as I understand it, there are new things coming down the pike as well. The lead and copper rule is potentially going to be updated. I think it's in the comment period. I mean, we might have just missed the comment period on it, but that's going to bring that standard to 10 parts per billion. Issue though, and the groups, the statewide groups that want to get into this with the schools is they've been back and forth about it being 5 parts per billion. Some people say 0. As far as I'm concerned, it needs to be 0. No, there is no safe level of lead, especially with our kids.
Mm-hmm. I'd just like to say we're doing a pilot program with the Isaac Walton League is with the Steel Valley School District, and it's a pilot recycling, find an alternative use to plastics program. But when I asked them when the last time their water at the school district was tested for lead, they said 5 years ago.
Yeah. It's not enforced very well at all. And the fact that they need to make it public knowledge, but they don't necessarily, they should be sending information to the kids to get to their parents. They should be having public meetings when that's happening. and it's not.
Come on, somebody must have something to say here. Come on. No.
When you were talking about the full lead lines being replaced, what areas is that being done with?
So PWSA is doing that for the city of Pittsburgh. They're doing the full lead line replacements. Wilkinsburg Penn Joint has been doing lead line replacements as well, but they're doing partial, which we see as a very big problem because when they do that, then lead gets into the system. You get heightened lead levels when they do partial line replacements. And I mean, they're only required to give notice to the property owner that they need to replace their side. That's all that's required. And they're kind of falling back on that's all that's required. And so we've been really talking with them a lot about why that is insufficient and that there is funding out there. Like Penvest just announced increased funds for doing things like full lead line replacements. So we're trying to help them see the light and do the work to get the funding to follow in PWSA's example before it becomes absolutely mandated.
Heather, if I can ask you a question.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking stringently about lead here, which is nasty. And we know that chloramine heightens the lead in the water. Are you doing any testing for bromides, which has no standards, which is the bromochloroform and all the bromos I said is part of bromine? And the second thing is, when was the last time any radiation for 226 and 228 was tested in the water in Duva? Our area's been over 5 years before we've had a 226 test for radium in our drinking water. Has Pittsburgh done any better than we have in a rural area?
I am not sure. A lot of my work has been around lead. But I believe, now your report mentioned some things about PWSA, right?
Yes.
Did it look like they were including that with some of their studies?
We, as we said before, we are woefully inept on testing for radium-228, 226. And even when we do the proper testing, the gamma spec test, the DEP refuses that test and goes back to the 300 series test, which is not adequate because it doesn't work well in water with high TDS, and our mine water is high in TDS. Another thing that's as scary as crap is we got over 1.2 trillion gallons of water underground in our area right here. And if they have dumped that frack water, which we're almost sure they have, into those abandoned mines, how do you treat 1.2 trillion gallons of water? You see, we're just so far behind. We gotta build up the water treatment plants, we gotta drill up the sewage discharge plants, and we definitely have to watch where this waste product from these industries going. And Mike mentioned Trevita, which is now Westmoreland County landfill. It polluted the river bank. It killed all the bacteria in the sewage treatment plant, so therefore they were running raw sewage right into the Mon River. And this goes on, and who knows what else is not being tested for. We probably just skimmed the surface of the ones we put out from these quote proprietary chemicals and surfactants and lubricants and all this other stuff that's being used.
Yeah.
These chemicals are coming from someplace. Let's stop them.
Yeah, I mean, as long as our regulations only have a limited amount of things to test for, they're just going to test for those same things. So we're going to continue to not know. I know Women for a Healthy Environment does a lot of testing as well. They have managed the lead testing that the Our Water campaign has done, like in Wilkinsburg, in order to make an argument to Wilkinsburg Penn Joint. So I can see if they are looking at those expanded list, because because there's been a lot of information out there about like just how far behind we are with the different things that we need to be testing for. But I will look.
Another thing, too, you should know is, in reference to what Ned said, was, I know this is hard for people to grasp, but we're really facing a shitstorm like you've never faced before with this petrochemical industry. And we have, the worst part about it is the chemicals. What happens is when the plastics go to the landfills and go into the streams, they break down into microplastics, then they break down into nanoplastics, and they go into the air and they drop down everywhere on the planet. Every single, there's not like, I have this argument all the time with my wife. She says, Mike, let's just get the hell out of here. Well, there's nowhere to go. There is literally nowhere. I'm talking about the Pyrenees. I'm talking about the Alps. You should see the amount of micro and nanoplastics they're finding on top of the Alps. And then her favorite place she wants to go to because they banned fracking is Scotland. Well, guess how much not only microplastics they found in Scotland, which did ban fracking, but guess where they're going to be getting all their frack gas from? The good old US of A. Every single, Dee likes to point this out, every single human being, including everybody in this room, you see this credit card here? This is 5 millimeters. This is how much plastic you ingest into your body every single week. Every single week, every one of you, 5 millimeters of plastic. Yeah, milligrams. I'm sorry, thank you. Oh, I'm glad I have the professors here. It's going to be 10 times worse, and we're not going to have a cancer alley, we're going to have a cancer valley. And the problem is when you confront the petrochemical industry with the back end of what they're doing, they not only take no responsibility, but they have no answers. None. We need to make them accountable. If the public forces the petrochemical industry to clean up their mess, they will be out of business in a minute. They will not be able to afford it because the mess they're making will take hundreds of years to clean up. And that's just if we started now.
Not to mention cutting the subsidies, which they're running on.
Yeah, our illustrious Democratic governor and our Republican legislature, including a lot of Democrats, voted for it too, to give another millions and millions of dollars in taxpayer subsidies. By the way, we subsidize the shell industry, the taxpayer, $1.3 billion. Our tax money is subsidizing my kids getting cancer. Now you know why I'm pissed off. It's going to keep going on, folks, until One Pennsylvania, the Isaac Walton League, all the other environmental groups, all the unions, all the African American communities and frontline communities, and by frontline communities I also mean Greene County and Washington and Fayette counties, until we all get together and find our common ground and our political will, the stuff is just going to keep going on. And I will tell you right now, I am a revolutionary, because that's what it's going to take.
Yeah, I don't want people going home and taking the bridge, because it's clear that we're fighting for our lives, not only others, but our own. We don't have a future at all unless we do have a revolution, a total change, a total transition, metamorphosis, as Patty DeMarco calls it. I live 2 doors away from a lead factory that for decades. So, and half of the roof is off of it right now. They never cleaned it up. And so I live in a very high lead and other contaminated neighborhood. And one of the things that keeps me alive for the last 30 years, keeps me having a reason to get up in the mornings, because I read a book called Micropower that told about bioremediation. And type in bioremediation composting. You'll come up with the fact that Lead actually can be bioremediated. It can't be eliminated. It can be segregated by the microbes and the fungi. The community of life at the microbial level acts as Gaia. It acts as a conscious community to help when you encourage a diversity and a quantity of life in an area, such as Everybody's Garden, which I founded with our urban farming in the Hazelwood section of Pittsburgh. So these things, bioplastics, hemp, the pollution treatment industry, because this is the good-bad paradox. The worst things happened in Pittsburgh. We were what my mother used to call, correctly or not, the most polluted city in the world. Possibly, Turin, Italy was worse. But we developed, because of that, for our need to survival, we developed a pollution treatment industry that was way, way ahead of other parts of the world. When Chernobyl happened, they actually, the first thing they did remote control attempt to see what was going on, because they couldn't get it. It was too hot at the core, at the melted core. They actually took toy truck and duct taped it with a camera to try to get in and see what was happening, because it was too hot for them, for a human, for an animal to handle. And we had that same week, we had CMU students walking in Shenley Park with a huge spider-like robot. And I thought, oh my God, we have something to give the world. We have an expertise base and a advanced scientific ability to serve the world and get paid for it. Thank you.
Fitzgerald will say that what paid for Pittsburgh's recovery was gas.
Yeah.
Thank you, Maren.
Getting eds and
In closing, I want to say just two more things. The study that Ken's talking about, we have formed a partnership, meaning the Isaac Walton League chapters in Western Pennsylvania have formed a partnership with Center for Coalfield Justice and with Southwest Pennsylvania Environmental Health Project. And we're going to pick a day, and we're going to release the study and the information to the public in newspapers, community newspapers, on the internet, on television. We're going to do a shock and awe like they haven't seen before, and let the public know that their water, in fact, is being poisoned, and it's time to do something about it. And secondly, I'd like to strongly encourage everybody here, the students, Fridays for Future, have put out a call for everybody to show up on Earth Day. That's Wednesday, April 22nd, downtown Pittsburgh. We're going to assemble at 12 noon at the City County building, and we want to shut downtown Pittsburgh down that day. And we want to target EQT. We want to target the financial backers like Mellon and PNC, the Duquesne Club, and the politicians like Rich Fitzgerald, and let them know that they're up against an army. They're just not up against a couple of students. They're up against a lot of people and a lot of organizations. So I'm begging you to please come out that day and support the students, the young people. They're the ones that are going to have to deal with this stuff long after people like Ken and myself and Ned are long gone. Thank you, everybody, for showing. Please, when you come back to these things in 2 weeks and 2 weeks after that, please try to get speakers and people to address how we are going to get from here to where we need to get to. The places that Heather talked about, the places that Ken talked about, the places that Ned, shutting down the petrochemical industry, building a sustainable energy grid, getting water testing standards raised, upgrading our infrastructure. This stuff will only happen if there's a political street movement to do it. Thank you very much for coming out tonight.